Hello everyone! Today we're going to talk about Singin' in the Rain. This 1952 classic is arguably the most beloved live-action musical film in history. It stars Gene Kelly, Debbie Reynolds, and Donald O'Connor, and was co-directed by Stanley Donen and Gene Kelly, who choreographed the musical sequences. It features songs by Arthur Freed and Nasio Herb Brown, with a screenplay by Betty Comden and Adolph Green. Like some of you, I'm sure, I was introduced to this movie as a child. My mom had taped it off the TV onto a VHS tape, and it was a popular one in our family, so I saw it a few times. But it's been years since I watched the whole thing start to finish, and so when I revisited it for this review, there was stuff I didn't remember and stuff I had never noticed before, and it felt especially new because we watched it on Blu-ray. Let me tell ya, Blu-ray is the way to go. The movie looks amazing. The color, the clarity, the costumes, wow! Unfortunately, while I watched the Blu-ray, I pulled my screenshots and clips from the DVD, so what you'll see in this video is fine, but lesser quality. It's not clips of what I'm raving about. The Blu-ray release was considered a huge upgrade, so do yourself and the movie a favor and spring for the Blu-ray, or the 4K release, but I've heard the differences are negligible. It's 1927, and silent film stars Don Lockwood and Lena Lamont rule the roost at Monumental Pictures, cranking out one movie after another, while the tabloids perpetuate rumors that they're lovers off-screen as well, a lie Don tolerates because it's good publicity. After the premiere of their latest swashbuckler, Don escapes a horde of clamoring fans and drops into the car of dancer Kathy Selden. Don turns on the charm and tries to make a move, but Kathy puts him in his place with a critique of his acting so brutal that she sends him into an existential tailspin. He can't stop thinking about her, though, and after a couple feisty run-ins, they begin a secret relationship. Meanwhile, everybody at Monumental is poo-pooing the advent of sound on film until The Jazz Singer is a smash hit, launching a studio-wide panic. Musicals are becoming the rage, and since Don and his buddy Cosmo got their start as a musical act in vaudeville, Kathy proposes they turn the dueling Cavalier into the dancing Cavalier. That's swell for Don, except his co-star Lena can't sing or dance, and the studio doesn't even let her talk to the public lest people learn what she really sounds like. So Cosmo proposes they dub her lines using Kathy's voice instead. But Lena can't find out. Singin' in the Rain is just about as perfect a movie as you could ask for. It has so much to offer: sweet and sassy romance, funny comedy, great song and dance numbers, and it's a movie about the movie business, which is something Hollywood adores, but with a refreshingly lighthearted, self-deprecating view. It pokes fun at Tinseltown and its riches, its artifice, its illusion of perfection. It's tough to say if this is a love letter to the silent film era or a parody of it. Kathy mercilessly criticizes the exaggerated acting style of the time. Don begins to wonder if he really is just a hammy two-bit player with no genuine acting chops, and comes to the conclusion that she's right. I must protest, that's not how every silent film actor performed. There are plenty of examples of great, subtle acting from the 1920s. But the movie also lovingly recreates the hustle and bustle of the era, the hysteria of the fans, the pre-stock market crash extravagance. Don Lockwood is basically Douglas Fairbanks, doing lots of stunts and acrobatics, and associated with one particular leading lady. And we get plenty of insider views. I love the continuous take as Kelly and O'Connor walk through the soundstage where multiple films are being shot at once. Singin' in the Rain thus pulls back the curtain on how movie magic is made, while making movie magic itself. All the performances are delightful. Gene Kelly is charming and funny, Donald O'Connor is a total goofball and slips in a couple great one-liners, Debbie Reynolds steals your heart, but oddly enough, given this is a musical, the performance I love most comes from the one featured actor who doesn't do a lick of singing, Gene Hagen.
What's wrong with the way I talk? What's the big idea? Am I dumb or something?
Lena Lamont has all the best lines, and Jean Hagen deserves more credit for how hard she was working here and how hilarious she is.
Well, I make more money than Calvin Coolidge put together.
Vocally, she was channeling Judy Holliday's character in 1950's Born Yesterday, but the character is something else. A delusional, vindictive movie star, frustrated that no one ever lets her give the speeches, and determined to have Dawn for herself. Lena is as unscrupulous as she is clueless, and all of this makes her a very fun villain. One of the comedic highlights of the film is the sequence where they begin shooting scenes with a microphone. Lena can't get the hang of it, they have to keep moving the mic, it's too sensitive, she keeps complaining, and the director is slowly driven insane. I love the director, Roscoe Dexter, played by Douglas Fowley.
You've got to talk into the mic.
Well, I can't make love to a bush.
And then there's the disastrous preview, where the audience howls with laughter and the audio gets out of sync. I always giggle when Don tosses his stick to the side and it crashes on the floor. Both scenes are just perfection, and I have to admit, anytime I read about studios rewiring their sets and the sound guys who didn't exist before, innovating new techniques and coming up with solutions to the problems, and actors struggling to make the transition from silent to sound, I picture these scenes. Something unusual about Singin' in the Rain compared to your average musical, at least of the olden days, is that the songs came first and then the story. The film was proposed by MGM producer Arthur Freed, who was parodied on screen by Millard Mitchell as R.F. Simpson. He wanted to showcase a bunch of old songs he had written with composer Nacio Herb Brown. Many of these songs appeared in other films in the late 20s, early 30s, which prompted them to set the story in 1927, a fateful year for Hollywood. Prolific musical writing team Adolph Green and Betty Comden came aboard to develop a story about the transition to talkies. There are only 2 new songs in the film, Moses Supposes, written by Comden and Green, and Make 'Em Laugh, a shameless echo of Cole Porter's Be a Clown, written by Freed and Brown at Stanley Donen's request. Moses Supposes is the most ridiculous number in the whole film, I think, a scene that serves no real purpose, and Don and Cosmo's antics are absolutely absurd, but it's got great energy, the tongue twisters are creative, the song's catchy as anything, and the choreography for Kelly and O'Connor is fresher and more exhilarating than what we saw them do earlier in the Fit as a Fiddle number. By the way, I did catch a continuity error in this scene. Cosmo and the tutor are shown having the same interaction from 2 different angles. Oops. Don's elocution coach is played by Bobby Watson, who seems to have been a very good sport. Incidentally, he has the bizarre distinction of having portrayed Hitler on screen 10 times. The other new song, Make 'Em Laugh, is Donald O'Connor's tour de force, and I gotta say, this routine seems scarier to me the older I get. The crazy way he throws himself around, every pratfall, ouch! He's gotta be made of rubber, in addition to having a silly putty face. Also, I'm probably too impressed by this one gag where he makes it seem like the dummy's a deadweight. If I'm being brutally honest, the love song You Were Meant for Me makes me feel kind of sleepy. It's a pretty ballad, there's nothing wrong with it, and the scene is attractive. I just find the song somewhat soporific. Same with Would You. And am I correct in thinking that the beautiful girl sequence is silly on purpose? As studios take advantage of sound, musicals explode, and the film speeds us through a dizzying montage of scenes that imitate Busby Berkeley musicals and Ziegfeld's Follies. And then we settle on Beautiful Girl, a corny number that turns into a fashion show halfway through. But it's supposed to be corny and kind of goofy, right? I laughed. All I Do Is Dream of You is a really fun number, even if technically speaking it's much simpler than the others. That's the song that's been rattling around in my head for the last few days, so that's been entertaining, although the earworm I've got is a confused hybrid version that combines this rendition and Michael Bublé's cover. By the way, am I the only one who sees this and thinks Fosse? Good morning. Great song, great routine. It's too bad I can't watch it anymore without thinking about the arduous rehearsals and Gene Kelly getting frustrated with poor 19-year-old Debbie Reynolds and how miserable she was and how much her feet were bleeding in her shoes. You can't argue with the results, though. I talked about the Singin' in the Rain scene once before in a video I made listing my favorite dance numbers in movie musicals, so if you saw that, you already know I really like this one. I think Singin' in the Rain is one of the most perfect expressions of joie de vivre on film. In context, it's about that euphoric feeling you experience when you've fallen in love, but it's not restricted to that specific emotion, and I think its universality is part of what makes the scene enduringly popular. It's also just beautifully done. The way it's shot and lit is gorgeous. I love the way Gene Kelly interacts with the entire set: lamppost, gutter, shop window, umbrella, curb, puddles. It's also my favorite vocal performance of Kelly's. His voice is warm and smooth. You can hear him smiling even if you're not looking at the picture. There are two big rumors out there regarding this scene. One is that Kelly shot it across a couple days while he had a fever of 103. This story, I believe, is true. And what a champ. Imagine having a fever and dancing around in wet, heavy clothes like that. He was so soggy and saturated that his wool suit actually shrunk. Which brings me to the other rumor, that instead of water, they used milk to make the rain show up better on camera. This story, I believe, is not true. It's a funny idea. I don't know who started it. Is that something that other films did? Is there some precedent for that myth? Broadway Melody is a lengthy sequence that drops near the end of the film. It's a big one, but I confess it did make me realize how much I didn't understand the alleged plot of this movie they're making, The Dancing Cavalier. It starts out as a Three Musketeers knockoff, and then it becomes A Tale of Two Cities by way of a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. And okay, I'll roll with it. But how exactly does this scene fit in? Fortunately, you can get away with a wild non sequitur in a movie like this, and the film certainly wouldn't be the same without it. It uses bold, rich colors, imaginative, slightly crude sets, which do remind me of some of the scenery in the ballet in 1948's The Red Shoes. And then, finally, we saw her name in the opening titles, Cyd Charisse. What an entrance! Charisse plays a slinky flapper who messes with Kelly's idealistic young hoofer. Admittedly, this isn't my favorite Cyd Charisse dance number. That would be the Girl Hunt Ballet with Fred Astaire in The Bandwagon. But this is classic. Her hair and her green frock are striking, plus the green hue of her stockings. Anything to make her legs look even longer. Cyd Charisse's legs seem as long as two of me stacked on top of each other. He encounters her again a moment later, and we transition into a fantasy sequence within the fantasy sequence, Kelly and Charisse's highly stylized pas de deux on the stairs, where she's discarded her vamp persona. I am fascinated by her ridiculously long scarf and her shoes. They're like ballet slippers with a thin, flexible sole, but they're also sandals, and the idea of standing on point and all of that in sandals? Ugh! The sequence wraps up with a bang, Kelly's big "gotta dance" belt, and what I think of as his signature move, and it closes with some splashy effects for good measure. The film ends with a reprise of Singin' in the Rain, Lena pantomiming in front of the crowd while Kathy sings behind the curtain. Debbie Reynolds is clearly performing Singin' in the Rain here. You can tell it's her. Even if you hadn't already heard her sing, you would know because her singing voice sounds just like her speaking voice. But when Don and Kathy sing the You Are My Lucky Star duet, I suddenly realized she's dubbed. What? And I noticed she was also dubbed in the scene where Kathy performs the song Would You, dubbing for Lena. Now, I never noticed this when I was a kid, and if this is well-known trivia, forgive me, I'm only just learning about it, and I can't help being a little shocked. given what the movie's all about. It seems unnecessary since there is ample evidence that Debbie Reynolds could sing just fine. And I've definitely at least heard her sing You Are My Lucky Star as a solo. Was that a deleted scene, or is this some Mandela effect thing? But apparently the powers that be decided to dub Reynolds for these 2 brief songs, not because of any lack of confidence in her ability, but because they felt her voice sounded too young and immature for these romantic ballads. Quite frankly, I find that preposterous. Reynolds was dubbed by singer and actress Betty Noyes, who was a vocalist or made vocal contributions on a number of musicals, including some of the biggest musical hits of the 50s and 60s, plus half a dozen non-musical films, and she wasn't credited on any of them. One of the ones that was most notable to me is that she's the one who sang Baby Mine in 1941's Dumbo. Don't get me started on that song. There were only a couple times later in Noyes' career when she did receive screen credit, and I get it. She worked for MGM, the studio would call her in to record some vocals, the studio singers never got screen credit. It was normal for the time. But for her contribution to get no mention in the credits of this movie in particular seems kind of funny, kind of strange, kind of like a cruel irony. Does it tarnish the movie for me? No, I wouldn't go that far. But it did give me pause. Another element I wanted to enthuse about before I wrap this up, the costumes. Costumes were designed by Walter Plunkett, who was a real person. This is embarrassing to admit, but for years I've had a vague notion that Walter Plunkett might be a pseudonym that people in the costume department commonly used for screen credit. I suspect that this comes from Terry Pratchett's use of the common British stage name Walter Plynge for his protagonist in the 18th Discworld novel Masquerade. Walter Plynge, Walter Plunkett. You see where I went astray, right? Anyway, the costumes in this film are delectable. Bright, colorful, detailed, textured. Everything Debbie Reynolds wears is adorable, from her raincoat and boots to her periwinkle costume with the chiffon scarf cape thing that blows oh so artistically. And I noticed her shoes always have these cute little bows on them. I figure that's partly just the period, and partly to draw more attention to her feet during dance breaks. I already mentioned Sid Charisse's famous green costume, and Gene Kelly's apparel in the title number is equally iconic. Gene Hagen also wears some amazing over-the-top concoctions, but the costume that stood out to me most is one you see early on. It gets a tiny amount of screen time, but it's one of the first things that caught my attention at the beginning and made me say, wow, this movie looks amazing! And that's the Spider Lady gown worn by dancer Judy Landon as Olga Mara to the film premiere. The way it catches the lights is just dazzling, especially on the Blu-ray. We also see her wearing it while doing the tango at the after party, and about the prospect of sound on film, here's Olga's reaction.
Just a toy.
It's a scream. It's vulgar.
I'd also like to give a shout out to the quirky guy who does the sound demonstration, and future West Side Story star Rita Moreno has a small role as Zelda Zanders. Moreno doesn't get to do much in terms of singing and dancing, but her persona makes an impression. Also, Kathleen Freeman as Mrs. Dinsmore, Lena's elocution coach. You have no idea the number of times I've sat down here to film a video and said to myself, round tones. By the way, Freeman was a stunningly prolific actress, with 307 credits to her name.
And I can't stand him.
And I can't stand 'em.
I never come on here and say things like, you must see this movie, because I don't like to impose on people like that. But Singin' in the Rain is one of those classic films that you really ought to watch at least once in your life, even if you don't like musicals. Though it depicts a very specific point in time, there is something timeless about it, and I think it has something that everyone can enjoy. And those are some of my thoughts on Singin' in the Rain. I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to hear what you think about this movie, so go ahead and share your thoughts in the comments below if you like, and I'll see you again next Saturday. Thanks for watching.